Bonjour and welcome to French Footprints, the podcast sharing steps you can take towards raising bilingual children. I'm your host, Amy Mann, founder of Un de Trois Petits Pas, where I teach parents and children how to introduce French at home in fun, engaging, and accessible ways. Through Canadian Parents for French and funding from the Government of Canada, the French Footprints program shares research-based techniques and expertise to help build the confidence of parents and better the future of their kids. Today, we're diving into an important topic for parents, early French literacy in the home. Even if your child is still young and not yet reading, exposing them to French through stories and books can play a huge role in their language development. And it's not just about the kids. Parents can benefit too. So to help us unpack this, we are joined by someone with a wealth of experience in the world of French education, Karen Devonish-Mazzotta. She's been teaching French as a second language for close to 28 years with the Toronto District School Board and holds an MA in Second Language Learning from the University of Toronto. Karen is also a teacher librarian, and she's worked closely with the Ontario Ministry of Education to review curriculum documents. So thank you so much, Karen, for joining us today. I know you've got an extensive background in education, but could you begin by telling us just a little bit about why you chose your specific career path?
Oh, thanks, Amy. When I was in high school, I went on a French exchange, and I just loved the family that I was living with, learning French, realized I was pretty good at it, and it really brought me such joy getting to learn about new cultures and people that I would not have normally been exposed to. And when I was in elementary school, I always volunteered in my school library. I did in middle school and high school. And when it came time for me to apply to university, I applied to both library sciences as well as teachers college. And I remember my high school teacher librarian saying, you know, you can become a teacher librarian. So become a teacher, and this is a job that you can do as well. So for the majority of my career, I was a French as a second language teacher. I became as well a course director at the Faculty of Education at York University. So I also get to teach new teachers, but my other job is a bilingual teacher librarian working in a French immersion school. So it's really exciting to get to do both.
Oh my goodness, amazing. You have so much experience. I am so excited to ask you all of our questions.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. So let's just start with the basics. So how can early French literacy improve a child's language skills, even if they're not yet at that age where they're learning to read?
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, learning language is a really complex process, but it's very unique and very specific for each person. One thing we do know is that the mind is a pattern maker. And so there are some activities that support making patterns and helping language learning to become easier, and it facilitates language learning for children as they develop. For a child to be exposed to another language that's not sort of spoken in the home helps them learn that languages even exist. So it's important to learn another language because they understand and value that, oh, there's another way that people communicate in the world, and that way that people communicate has value. It helps them build relationships, and that they're able also to learn that code, and they're able to create relationships with people who are proficient in that language. So that's a really important lesson, I think, for a young child to learn. And you know, it sort of makes me think of when I was doing my master's at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto. I was exposed to a really interesting professor named Dr. Jim Cummins, who's now Professor Emeritus, and he spoke to us a lot about additive bilingualism and subtractive bilingualism. So a child learning a new language like French, but also keeping up with their home language, is sort of the example of additive bilingualism.
Sure.
And so it's really great because that child learns that languages have value, like I said, and that they're able to make connections to their own language when they learn a new language. Because what is the brain doing? It's seeking to make sense of the unfamiliar patterns in that new language. And as it's seeking to find those patterns, they find that there are some familiar sounds, there's some familiar words maybe, and even some familiar nonverbal cues. And all those are excellent tools and skills to develop if you're going to be an effective second language or third language or additional language speaker. Exposure to another language like French can be done through song, it can be done through oral reading, through viewing on the internet or streaming services, and all those kind of multimodal experiences that also engage other senses as well really makes the experience of learning a new language enriching and very significant.
So something that you said that's really interesting is how you mentioned it's such an important lesson for a child to learn that other languages exist, even if it's just introducing them to that fact. And it made me think about this time. My son speaks French primarily. And so we were speaking French together, and there was this other young boy, and he asked me, why don't you speak the normal language? And so I was like, actually, we speak our normal language, and you have a different language that feels normal to you. But did you know the only reason that that language feels normal to you is because it's the language of the city that you were born in? But if you were born somewhere else, you would have another normal language. And he was like, oh, I would actually like to learn some French. He'd never heard another language before. It was the first time, and for him, it was so different.
Yeah.
And so it was cool because now I know if ever that happens to my son again, he has the answer, right?
Exactly.
It does go to show, though, how important it is for children to be, citizens of the world and be open-minded and ready to just soak in and learn from everybody's differences. So why is it so helpful for the entire family and not just the children to incorporate some French at home?
Well, it's so wonderful for young children to see that language is a socio-cultural activity. And what that means is that language happens between people. Even like the example of, like you said, the child watched you interacting with your son. So they understand that that's something that's shared between people. It's that tool. Language is that tool that helps us to make sense of experience. So involving the whole family in language learning shows a child that learning in general is an ongoing process, but then language learning is ongoing and potentially never ending as you continue to build and construct experience using whatever that target language is. Years ago, I worked with Canadian Parents for French as an instructor for parents who are learning French themselves as their children were in second language programs. And we'd meet each week and learn the basics of French. And the feedback from the parents was that they would go home and speak French to their children. And the children would be so excited to see that their parents were actually making the effort to learn this language that they got to also learn in school. And sometimes the children would correct their parents or instruct their parents on, this is what you should say in this circumstance. And it just made the children feel so confident, and it was so empowering for them to be able to share something that they were good at in their home environment.
Oh, I really love that. I love that they're able to connect with their family members in that way. So what are some practical ways that parents can introduce French literacy into the home, especially during those early years, so before they head off to school?
Yeah, the possibilities are endless with some creativity and imagination and some research in regions where maybe you don't have a lot of French. It seems apparent around you. You can find activities that you're able to engage in with your children before they hit school. So years ago, when my 3 kids were really little, I would often purchase talking toys, for example, and look for the ones where I could switch the speech that came out of the toy into French. And sometimes it doesn't automatically show up on the shelves that way. And you have to do a little bit of research and find out who the distributor is and who the producer is. And you can ask, am I able to purchase the toy that's produced for a French-speaking region? And then you're able to get that toy sent to your house. And that makes such a big difference, because even if you speak a bit of French as a family at home, this is great because now there's this toy yattering at your kid as they're doing a ludic activity in a target language like French. I also investigated which branches in my public library system, for me it was Toronto, had the largest collection of French books. And often I would take my children to those branches and try to, sort of read through those collections. And it gave me so many more options, and my children so many more options for sort of stories in French that they could be exposed to. If you're not comfortable speaking in French, online there are some amazing free resources and audiobooks on websites, and games you can play with your children in French. So, for example, I'm thinking about websites like Bookily or Story Play or Your Baby Can Learn, Storyberries. At my school board, we have access to Tumble Books, but Tumble Books, I realize, also has free access on the internet. Recently, a kindergarten teacher told me about Boom Cards, and there are a lot of little games on Boom Cards that even a very young child, before they reach school age, if they, want to do some language learning online, they're bilingual Boom Cards, and they're little games that kids can play to help them learn the language.
With the internet, right, we now have access to so many languages, so many different resources. Before, back in the day, we really only had, books to rely on and the community. If there wasn't much in the community, it could be tricky. But now with online, we really do have so many resources at our fingertips.
Well, I wanted to add, I'd also encourage parents to switch the audio of any streaming system that they're using when they're either playing a show or a movie for their child. Don't forget to turn on the subtitles as well in French, because even if a child is very young and you think that they're not able to pick up on the sound and the graphophonic relationship, the grapheme, that's the letter, sometimes kids are able to find that pattern, and you want to give them the opportunity to not only hear the audio in French, but also to see the actual writing and the subtitles in French. But you have to tell them that that's what those words are, because sometimes they'll see those words running at the bottom of the screen and they don't pick up that that's actually what is being said.
That's a really cool thing. I've actually never thought about, I've thought about how subtitles could help parents learning especially. And I often recommend them to go for the French if they have, the confidence to do that, because if they've put on the English, it's helpful, but your brain's still relying on your English knowledge. Whereas if you've got the French ones there, obviously that can help you a lot more with your vocabulary. But I've never actually thought about the fact that it really helps even just associate words with what's being spoken. So that is very cool. But let's talk about some external resources that are available to parents. So obviously, it changes based on their location, but libraries are often incredible resources for families. So what are some programs or resources that we could maybe find at libraries or community groups that parents could look into to help introduce French literacy as soon as possible?
So I would definitely say at the library that you'll find hopefully lots of resources that are there. So I'm going to start first by talking about music. So often libraries have music that you can download and stream. If you can find that music in French, listening to music in a new language like French really helps children develop an ear for phonemic patterns. That's the small sound patterns in a target language. And when that pattern establishes itself in the brain, the kids are able to repeat the pattern, and that's them starting to sing in French. And don't feel it necessary to go to the library and borrow necessarily just children's music in French. You could borrow any music in French as long as you enjoy it and as long as your child enjoys it as well. I love to listen to music that actually makes you dance and move, because again, you're hearing the target language, you're hearing French, you're moving to it, so part of your body is reacting to it as well. You're feeling the rhythm, not only of the language and the music. And again, it's a multimodal experience, and I think that makes it so much more meaningful and so much more effective to really sort of internalize sort of the target language as you're having fun learning it. Public libraries also have audiobooks, which is great too. So if you're not comfortable in French, what's great is at a public library, you could always inquire to see how many audiobooks do they have that would be appropriate for your child, that you think your child would really enjoy. I found that library systems have really engaged in not only providing resources to children in English, but in other languages as well. And they often have funds to buy new materials. So if you ask, maybe they're able to purchase those resources for you.
Exactly. It can't hurt to ask. It really can only help. And they won't know that there's a need for that if they don't ask. Maybe it will help to really encourage them to go out and get those new resources. So beyond the stories and the books, those resources themselves, the socialization aspect of attending things like French story times, they can play a huge role in supporting a child and their growth. So what's your take on that when it comes to the socialization of little ones?
Language learning happens most effectively when it's in context with others. So circle time in French is a really effective way to demonstrate to a child that we're learning this language in order to get to know and build relationship with other people. And you may not think that there will be a circle time that you can find, but even doing a quick Google search of French circle times in various regions all across Canada, you'd be surprised how many actually exist, and it's worth the search. Why? Because in that environment, a young child hears maybe an oral reading. They're able to hear other people speaking the target language. They're able to look at an illustration and then make sense of that with the other cues that they're getting in the target language. And then it really helps them to start to build a foundation for learning and being able to communicate in that language. French Storytime contextualizes language learning by giving kids and children, but also parents as well, who are learning along, lots of comprehensible input that helps them make sense of language. Even when I read to my own students in the library, particularly I'm thinking about the junior kindergarten and the senior kindergarten students who are just starting to learn French and can be 3, 4, even 5 years old, I always try to pick a book that has some repetitive structure, a book that has rhythm. And after repeating those certain words over and over, the children start to anticipate what words are about to come, and then they start saying it with me. And that becomes a really interesting social activity where we start to do sort of a choral reading because we're reading together. And because they've heard that pattern in French repeated so many times, they're able to use it too. There are times when I even stop talking and I allow them to take ownership for saying the repetitive structure. And they're so happy when they can do it, and they can do it with the others in the group. And that's them really, like I said, internalizing and taking ownership for speaking the language and participating in the social activity to build a narrative together.
So something that you had mentioned was about finding those French circle times, doing that research. So it's important, I wanted to note here that even in those regions that don't have French circle times, there is an amazing new resource, part of French Footprints, for educators. There's no need to speak any French whatsoever. It's a certification program, the French Footprints. It helps educators introduce French through fun, through music, through movement, basically everything that you just said. It gives them the tools in order to be able to run a simple French circle time. There's no prior French needed. And so if you're a parent and you are looking for these French circle times and you can't find them, send them to French Footprints because it's a certification program. It's really budget friendly and it's super easy and fun for the educator to complete. And that will just allow us to help spread the love of French learning across Canada. And it's something that we're hoping to do with this podcast. We're hoping to do Canadian Parents for French, À Trois Petits Pas, and Families Canada put it together. And it's something we're super proud of and hoping that, centers, daycares, even, kindergarten educators, ECEs, it's there and it is ready to support anybody who wants to just add a little bit of fun French learning into their learning space. So thank you so much for all of your insights, Karen. It's been so encouraging to hear from somebody like you with so much expertise how beneficial it is to introduce literacy as soon as possible and to show parents that even if they don't have French themselves, there are ways that they can do that. So before we go, where do you recommend our listeners find more resources or learn more about any programs or supports available in their area?
We've been exploring the website French Street. If you go on the Canadian Parents for French national site, or even in your regional site, they likely will have a link there for French Street, and you'll see there are various different categories. Some are family experiences, and for very young children, you might find some really interesting options that they offer for families. I would also say seek out your Alliance Française if you have one in your region. Sometimes they have programs for young children, but just be aware that they're likely at a cost. If you attend any earlier program or a daycare, always go out and ask, is there anybody here who speaks French and would be willing to do a bit of French programming with the children or with my child? You'd be surprised how many people are like, yeah, I was waiting for somebody to ask me about that. And if you yourself speak French, feel free to offer that service as even a volunteer, because I'm sure a lot of other families would really appreciate it. The last thing I would say is if you do speak French, and French is one of the languages in your home, seek out your Centre Francophone if that exists in your region. They often provide excellent, outstanding resources and also experiences for children who have French in their home. And it's really worth, doing a little bit of research with the Centre Francophone.
Well, thank you so much again, Karen. It's been so great speaking with you. And to our listeners, if you're looking to introduce French into your home, reach out to your local library and definitely take a listen to our past podcasts, because there are so many different ideas from all of our lovely, lovely guests like Karen. Thank you so much again. Un grand merci beaucoup.
Avec plaisir. Merci, Amy.
So thanks for spending time with us on French Footprints. No matter your experience level, introducing French at home can be simple, fun, and effective. Keep listening as we continue to take steps towards a bilingual future. Au revoir! This project has been made possible by the Government of Canada. Ce projet a été rendu possible grâce au gouvernement du Canada.